The golden chandeliers of Lavinia spilled warm light across the pristine marble floors that gleamed like a showroom and cost more than most folks earned in a year. Crystal glasses clinked softly, a gentle percussion beneath the whisper of linen napkins and murmured conversation. Live piano music floated through the air like a perfume, elegant, intentional, designed to soothe. This place wasn't just a restaurant, it was an experience, a world carefully curated to make its guest feel like royalty. Every detail, from the hand-painted ceiling murals to the gold-trimmed menus, screamed exclusivity. You didn't just dine at Lavinia, you belonged there. Or you didn't come at all. At the heart of it stood Brent Calloway. Brent, immaculately dressed in a tailored suit and silk tie, surveyed the dining room with the satisfaction of a man who believed he'd earned everything he saw. For 3 years he'd ruled Lavinia not with kindness, but with calculated control. He had perfected the subtle art of exclusion, the mastery of discretion cloaked as professionalism. To Brent, running this restaurant wasn't just a job. It was his stage, his kingdom, and he was the gatekeeper. So, when the brass double doors swung open, letting in a crisp evening breeze and the faint hum of city life, Brent didn't flinch. Until he saw him. A man stepped in, maybe in his late 50s, maybe older. His jeans were faded, dotted with old paint splatters. His work boots were scuffed and worn like a soldier's armor, each crease a memory of labor. A simple flannel shirt hugged his frame, and his hair, streaked with gray, looked wind-blown, as though he hadn't bothered with a comb. His calloused hands rested at his sides, and his eyes, clear and steady, swept over the dining room not with entitlement but quiet wonder. Brent's posture stiffened. To him, this man was a blemish, a disruption in his pristine painting. How dare this stranger, dressed like he wandered off a construction site, step foot into his Lavinia? With a voice polished from years of theatrical reprimands, Brent called out, loud enough to command attention. "Excuse me, sir," he said, every syllable dripping with condescension. Conversations paused. Heads turned. "I think you may be lost." The man turned slowly, unfazed, and met Brent's eyes. There was no shame in his expression, only a quiet strength. "Actually," he replied gently, "I was hoping to get a table for dinner." A ripple of stifled laughter spread among the staff near the host stand. Brent, sensing an opportunity to reinforce his authority, puffed himself up like a peacock in front of an audience. His voice sliced through the room like a knife wrapped in silk. "A table," Brent echoed, as though the word itself offended him. He stepped closer, gesturing with subtle cruelty toward the man's attire. "Sir, this is Lavinia. We are not a roadside diner. Our guests adhere to a very particular standard." He paused just long enough to let everyone absorb the implication. "Our dress code requires business attire at minimum. Perhaps establishments more suited to your wardrobe exist down the street." Laughter followed, the kind that stings. Some patrons nodded in approval, others glanced away uncomfortably. Sarah, the young hostess behind the podium, chuckled nervously while pretending to organize menus, but not everyone found it amusing. Naomi Green, a senior waitress, froze mid-Polish, a dish towel clenched in her hand. Her gut twisted. Something about the way Brent wielded his authority like a blade made her skin crawl. This man hadn't caused trouble. He had asked politely for a seat, and Brent had turned it into a public spectacle. The man stood his ground. "I understand you have standards," he said softly, his voice still devoid of anger, though the hurt was beginning to surface beneath the calm. "But I have the money to pay for a meal. I was hoping—" "Money?" Brent barked a laugh so sharp it cut through the air. "Sir, our appetizers begin at $45.00. Our wines start at $70, 0 cents a bottle. You might want to reconsider where you choose to dine." More murmurs, a few uncomfortable glances among staff, but no one stepped in. Everyone knew what happened when you crossed Brent Calloway. He had fired a bartender last month just for correcting a wine order in front of a guest. "I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to leave," Brent announced, raising his voice like a stage actor delivering a final monologue. "We can't accommodate individuals who don't reflect our image standards. I'm sure you understand." For a moment, silence fell. The man didn't respond right away. He scanned the room slowly, pausing at the crystal chandeliers, the overpriced paintings, the velvet booths filled with people who now stared at him like he was beneath them. He didn't flinch. He simply nodded. "I see," he said, his voice more quiet than before, but somehow heavier. He turned to leave, and that was when Naomi saw it. Not embarrassment, not rage, but something deeper. A profound disappointment. Not just in Brent, but in everyone who had laughed, stayed silent, or looked away. As he reached for the door, Brent delivered the final blow. An insult that would echo in his own mind long after the laughter faded. "Next time," he called out, his tone mocking, "try the drive-through. It's more your speed." And with that, the man stepped out into the night, the door shutting behind him with a soft finality that would change everything. At least, the brass doors of La Viña closed with a quiet finality, sealing the opulent dining room in its golden glow once again. Laughter resumed, glasses clinked. The pianist continued his gentle, meandering tune. But beneath the surface of restored calm, something deeper had shifted. The staff, though still busy, moved with a subtle stiffness, as if they'd all just witnessed something ugly cloaked in formality. They had learned a harsh lesson that night, that cruelty, when hidden behind etiquette and expectations, can still cut just as deeply, and none of them, not even Brent, could imagine that this moment marked the unraveling of his carefully curated kingdom. Back in the kitchen, Naomi Green was already moving on instinct. Her hands trembled as she untied her apron, the air heavy with the scent of seared butter and roasted herbs. Around her, the kitchen buzzed like a beehive. Orders printed and ripped, chefs barking over the hiss of hot pans, waiters darting past with trays balanced like ballet dancers. But none of that reached her. All she could hear was the echo of Brent's mocking laughter and the gut-wrenching silence of those who'd chosen comfort over conscience. For 2 years, Naomi had called this place her job, her hustle, her stepping stone. Every tip she tucked into her savings jar was a piece of her dream, a cozy cafe of her own, somewhere warm and welcoming, where no one would ever be made to feel small. La Viña paid well. It was supposed to be worth the stress, but tonight something inside her cracked. "Taking your break early, Naomi?" Miguel, one of the sous chefs, called out as she moved toward the back exit. "Something like that," she murmured, grabbing a takeout container and methodically plating up a dish she could never afford to eat herself. La Viña's herb-crusted salmon, roasted vegetables with rosemary, and a delicate scoop of truffle risotto. Nearly $60, 0 cents worth of elegance. But it wasn't about the price tonight. It was about dignity. Outside, the alley was bathed in the pale glow of a single street lamp, casting long, melancholy shadows. Naomi hesitated. Maybe he was already gone. Maybe she'd missed her chance. But then, there he was, sitting quietly on a concrete ledge, legs crossed at the ankles, hands resting calmly in his lap. He looked up at the city's smog-hued stars. A quiet silhouette, untouched by the humiliation he'd just endured. "Excuse me," Naomi called, stepping gently out of the darkness. The man turned, and for the first time she saw him clearly. His eyes were warm, but keen, the kind of eyes that noticed too much and judged too little. Lines carved deep into his face spoke of years of grit and grace, of getting through life's storms without bitterness, just acceptance. "I'm sorry about what happened in there," Naomi said softly, her voice raw. "That wasn't right, none of it." He tilted his head, studying her. "You work there?" "I'm a waitress." She nodded, suddenly unsure of herself. I should have said something, but—" "You'd lose your job?" He finished the sentence for her, not with disdain, but with understanding. She nodded again, ashamed but grateful. Without another word, she held out the takeout box. "I brought you dinner. It's not much, but—" "It felt wrong, letting you walk away like that." The man's gaze fell to the container, then back to her. "You probably need this more than I do." "Please," she insisted, stepping closer. "Let me do one thing right tonight." For a long moment he said nothing, then with a small, genuine smile he accepted the meal. "What's your name?" "Naomi Green." "Well, Naomi, thank you, this is very kind." They sat together in that narrow alley, an unlikely pair sharing a quiet moment in the shadow of luxury. The man ate slowly, savoring each bite with the kind of appreciation only those who've worked hard for little can truly understand. Naomi watched him, her heart pounding with uncertainty. Had she crossed a line? Risked too much? "This is excellent," he said, breaking the silence. "Whoever cooked this knows their craft." "Chef Antoine," she said reflexively. "Trained in Paris." The words felt ridiculous in the alley, but he smiled. "I should probably head back," she added, glancing at her phone. "Break's almost over." But he didn't rush. Instead, he asked her questions, thoughtful, deliberate. How long had she worked there? What were the staff like? Did the customers usually treat them with respect? How often did Brent act the way he had tonight? Naomi answered, honestly. More honestly than she ever had. She told him about Brent's favoritism, about the double standards based on looks, race, or charm, about the customers who seemed to thrive on condescension, and somewhere in there, he asked the one question that stopped her cold. "And you? Why do you stay?" She paused, watching a delivery truck crawl past. "I'm saving up. I want to open my own cafe. Something small, something warm, a place where nobody gets looked down on." He nodded deeply. "That's a beautiful dream." As he finished the last bite, Naomi noticed something odd. His eyes kept flicking toward the restaurant's windows. He wasn't just eating. He was studying. The building, the layout, the staff's movements, the rhythm of the place. It was subtle, but it didn't feel accidental. "I should go," she said, standing. "Thanks for letting me try to make things right." He rose, handing back the empty container with care. "No, Naomi, thank you. Tonight you showed me something important." She walked back toward the kitchen door, her steps heavy with reflection. That hadn't just been a kind gesture, it had been a catalyst. She couldn't shake the feeling that their conversation had cracked something open, inside the man, inside herself, maybe even inside the walls of Lavinia. The next morning, Naomi returned for her early shift, dragging her feet through a fog of exhaustion. She hadn't slept, not really. Her thoughts had looped all night. What she did, what it meant, what might happen if anyone had seen. Lavinia, stripped of its nighttime glamour, looked sterile in the morning light. Just cold marble and empty tables. Without the chandeliers and violin music, it was simply a shell. But the quiet didn't last. "Has anyone seen last week's incident reports?" Sarah, the hostess, barked, digging through a file cabinet, her usually flawless hair a frizzed mess. "Corporate wants everything from the past 2 months." "Corporate?" Naomi blinked, stunned. Miguel emerged, dusted in flour. "Some big shot showed up an hour ago, asked for employee files. security footage. Brent's been in his office making calls since 6. Naomi's blood ran cold. Security footage. Had they seen her in the alley, over a meal? Was this it? Her dream ending over salmon and risotto? "What kind of beak shot?" she whispered. James, a waiter, rushed past. "Corporate auditor. Word is there might be an ownership shakeup. Prestige Dining's in financial trouble." Before she could process it, Brent Calloway burst from his office. He looked unmade, shirt wrinkled, tie loose, eyes bloodshot. The king, no longer in control. "Where is everyone?" he snapped. "We've got a full inspection. I want this place spotless." But it was already too late. The tides were shifting, and Brent was about to find out that the walls he'd built to keep the world out had started closing in. "Sarah, find those incident reports. Miguel, make sure the kitchen logs are perfect, and someone needs to—" Brent's voice trailed off as his eyes landed on Naomi. For a brief, stomach-churning moment, Naomi feared he knew, that he'd seen her slipping out the back door the night before with a takeout box meant for a stranger. But instead, he simply waved her off, like she was an insect buzzing near his ear. "Just do your job and stay out of the way." The morning crawled by, thick with the kind of tension that makes every sound feel like a warning bell. Staff moved briskly, speaking in hushed tones, avoiding eye contact unless absolutely necessary. The usual gossip and banter had vanished, replaced by whispered questions and speculative dread. Layoffs, new management. What if the entire staff was being evaluated for cuts? Naomi tried to lose herself in routine, folding napkins, aligning wine glasses, resetting tables. But her mind was far from the dining room. Everything felt fragile, like the entire structure of Lavinia was being held together with a fraying ribbon. Around noon, as she was laying down silverware for the lunch service, she saw him. At the bar, a man in a sharp navy suit flipped through a stack of documents. His back was turned, but his presence felt magnetic, familiar in a way that made the hairs on Naomi's neck stand on end. When he turned slightly to speak with the bartender, her breath caught in her throat. It was him, the man from the alley. But gone were the paint-smeared jeans and tired flannel. In their place, a tailored suit, a crisp shirt, Italian leather shoes, and the calm, deliberate air of someone used to commanding attention. His silver-streaked hair was perfectly styled. He didn't just look comfortable here, he looked like he belonged. Naomi froze, the bundle of silverware slipping from her hands and clattering across the tile. The sharp noise echoed through the nearly empty dining room. A few heads turned. So did he. Their eyes met. For a moment, suspended in time, the din of the restaurant fell away. She stared into the eyes of a man she thought she knew, a man she had fed out of empathy, but the gaze that met hers was layered. Recognition, yes, but also scrutiny. Not coldness, not warmth, something deeper, as if he were still watching, still collecting data, still deciding. Then he turned back to his papers. Naomi's hands trembled as she picked up the fallen silverware. Her heart thudded in her chest as questions surged. Who was this man? What was he doing here, in that suit, with those documents? Had their late-night encounter been a setup, a trap, a test? "Naomi, are you okay?" Seething Miguel appeared beside her, concern shadowing his brow. "Fine," she lied. Even she could hear how thin her voice sounded. "Just tired." But she wasn't tired. She was shaken, unmoored. Every movement she made from then on was mechanical. Smiling, greeting customers, writing down orders. Her eyes, however, kept drifting toward the man at the bar, watching, listening, measuring. They remained a mass of red from that point forward, with Marshurst writhing in pain, far worse than she was. Finally, she stuck her out, shaking her head, looking down at the ball. He never left, not all day. He stayed through lunch, working quietly but with purpose. Naomi caught him observing every detail. How the waitstaff treated customers, how the kitchen responded to stress, how Brent swaggered through the dining room like a prince playing king. It was unsettling, like watching someone peel back the layers of a story you thought you understood. By mid-afternoon, the tension in the air had thickened into dread. Word spread. All employees. Mandatory meeting. Closing time. No exceptions. "This is it," James whispered as he tugged on a clean uniform. "Whatever's going down, we're about to find out." Naomi nodded, her face calm but her mind churning. She couldn't explain it, but she knew. That man, whatever he had planned, was here for more than numbers, more than management. He had seen something last night that changed the course of this place. And somehow, her decision in that alley wasn't just an act of kindness. It had been a spark. At 9:00 p.m., after the last creme brulee had been plated and the final check signed, the staff gathered in the main dining room. 23 employees sat on velvet chairs, usually reserved for high profitable guests, their eyes flicking nervously around the room. Naomi sat near the back. Her hands were clammy. Her heart wouldn't settle. Brent stood near the hostess podium, his posture rigid, dressed in his best suit, like he was preparing for trial. He had spent the last hour rehearsing a speech in the mirrored back bar, lips moving silently, as if reciting lines from a doomed play. "All right, everyone," he announced with a hollow clap. "Today's been unusual, but let me assure you, Lavinia remains committed to excellence. Except," his voice strained with forced optimism. No one looked convinced. "Yes, there's been some routine corporate oversight, standard for a restaurant of our level. Nothing to be alarmed about." As Brent rambled about loyalty and high standards, Naomi's eyes shifted. The man in the navy suit had entered the room, but this time he wasn't alone. 2 others flanked him, a stern woman with a leather portfolio and a young man clutching a sleek tablet. The suited man's eyes scanned the staff, methodically, thoroughly, until they landed on Naomi again. A flicker of acknowledgement passed between them, but it was what came next that would shake the room. "And with your continued dedication," Brent said, trying to steer the narrative, "we'll maintain the quality and class that makes Lavinia." "Excuse me." The voice was calm but firm. Brent turned, startled. The man in the suit stepped forward. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding," he began, his tone even but commanding. "I'm Thomas Clay. As of yesterday, I'm the majority owner of Lavinia." A wave of shock swept through the room. Gasps, eyes widened. Naomi's pulse roared in her ears. Brent stammered. "The parent company didn't. I wasn't informed." "Dambe filed for bankruptcy protection last week," Thomas said coolly. "I acquired this restaurant and 2 others as part of a restructuring process. My team has been evaluating operations, including staff conduct, to determine alignment with our new standards." He walked into the center of the room, his quiet authority silencing even the hum of the refrigeration units. "I believe in understanding my businesses from the ground up. That's why I visited last night." A collective breath was held. Brent's jaw fell slack. The realization washed over his face like a rising tide of horror. You were the man the one you refused service to," Thomas confirmed. "The one you humiliated in front of your staff and patrons. The man you told to try the drive-through." Thomas turned slightly. The woman beside him retrieved a tablet from her case. "We have security footage of the entire incident. Would you like me to play it?" "No," Brent said too fast, then forced a laugh. I mean, that won't be necessary. I was just enforcing policy. Dress code, you understand? Of course, Thomas replied, his tone measured. Policies are important, but so is respect, so is integrity, so is kindness. He turned back to the staff. A restaurant's success isn't defined only by profit margins or how many stars it holds. It's defined by how it treats every person who walks through its doors. Hospitality is more than service. It's the heart of what we do. Naomi's eyes welled. And yet, Thomas continued, I saw something else last night. Something that tells me this place can be more. His gaze returned to Naomi. She felt it in her chest. Commodore chose empathy over silence, compassion over fear, without being asked, without needing recognition. She saw someone treated unfairly and did something about it. And then there was a pause. With exhales and entrance, the room fell into absolute stillness. And in that moment, Naomi understood. Her small act in the alley wasn't forgotten. It changed everything. Thomas's voice softened, but its weight deepened. The smallest acts of compassion, he said, letting the silence breathe between his words, reveal the biggest truths about character. The words hung in the air like candle smoke, delicate, yet impossible to ignore. Naomi felt them settle around her like a second skin. She kept her eyes fixed on her trembling hands, unable to lift her gaze. Yet, beneath the stillness, her heart thundered in her chest, a steady drumbeat of fear and recognition. She could feel the room shift, feel the staff searching for the unnamed hero Thomas had praised, but she said nothing. Not yet. Brent, standing just feet away, fought to maintain his composure. His shoulders stiffened, and he pulled on his mask of corporate charisma, though it now fit like a costume 2 sizes too small. Mr. Clay, he began, voice scraping the edges of desperation, I appreciate your perspective, but I want you to understand that I've always placed Lavinia's brand image above all else. What happened last night was me doing my job, protecting the atmosphere we've cultivated. Standards. Thomas repeated, his tone crisp with a quiet authority that made the words sound poisonous. Let me tell you what I saw, Mr. Calloway. He gave a subtle nod, and the woman with the tablet tapped the screen. The restaurant's display, usually showcasing rare wines and nightly specials, lit up with security footage, grainy, black and white, yet crystal clear in its content. There was Thomas, entering the restaurant in paint-stained clothes. There was Brent, swooping in with his signature performance. And then came the audio. And try the drive-thru. The words, broadcast across the now silent dining room, hit with the force of a gavel. Several staff members winced. Naomi saw Sarah visibly shrink into her seat. But that's not all, Thomas said, switching to another angle. The footage showed patrons laughing, a few clapping. Brent's cruelty hadn't just been tolerated, it had been celebrated. You turned my humiliation into spectacle, Thomas said evenly, into dinner theater. I was maintaining the experience our clientele expects, Brent stammered, the flush of his cheeks betraying his rising panic. The experience of watching strangers be humiliated? Thomas asked, calm as still water but sharp as broken glass. Tell me, what did my appearance have to do with my ability to pay? Brent struggled. Well, in this business, first impressions, they're everything. Exactly, Thomas said, stepping closer. And your first impression told me that kindness is a liability here. That appearance trumps dignity, that bullying is acceptable so long as it's dressed in designer suits and spoken with a smile. His voice dropped, almost a whisper. But here's what you missed. First impressions go both ways. You could have heard a pin drop. My impression of you, Mr. Calloway, is that you've built a kingdom on exclusion, enforced with arrogance and held together by fear. And that's not a kingdom I intend to rule. He stepped back and addressed the room. Effective immediately, several changes are being made to Lavinia's management. Brent opened his mouth in protest, but Thomas cut him off with a raised hand. Mr. Calloway, your employment is terminated. You'll receive 2 weeks severance. Please pack your office tonight. Security will assist you. Gasps rippled through the room. Brent stood frozen, a man unaccustomed to consequences. You can't do this. I built this place. I raised profits 30% in 3 years. I can, Thomas said simply, and I am, because profit without principle is failure dressed in numbers. Then Thomas's tone shifted, warmer now. To the rest of you, your jobs are safe. In fact, we'll be hiring more support and improving working conditions. But first, 1 promotion. Naomi's stomach sank. She already knew. The employee who offered me dinner in an alley, who used her own tips to make a stranger feel human again, is exactly the kind of leader I want representing this place. 23 heads turned. Her cheeks burned crimson, her breath caught in her throat. Naomi Green, Thomas said with a soft smile that reached all the way to his eyes. Effective immediately, I'd like to offer you the role of assistant floor manager, with full authority to ensure that every person who walks through these doors feels welcomed and valued. The room erupted in a low wave of gasps and murmurs. Miguel looked at her with wide, proud eyes. Sarah's mouth fell open in stunned awe. Naomi sat motionless, her world tilted. Just 2 nights ago she had been folding napkins, worrying about every dollar. Now she was being trusted with the very heart of Lavinia. And yet, as she looked around at her colleagues, some cheering, some stunned, she realized something important. The real promotion wasn't in her paycheck or her title. It was in the proof that kindness, quiet and unrewarded, could change everything. 3 months later, Naomi stood where Brent once had, but Lavinia felt like a new place. The chandeliers still glowed, the plates were still garnished like artwork, but something deeper had shifted. Now there was warmth. "Welcome to Lavinia," she said, smiling at a young couple walking in. They wore jeans and cozy sweaters. The old Naomi might have worried they didn't belong. The new Naomi knew better. "We don't have a reservation," the woman said nervously, "but we saw the place and—" "Let me see what I can do," Naomi replied with a knowing smile. "I just had a beautiful window table open up." She led them across the floor, catching her reflection in the polished brass. A navy blazer, assistant manager's pin, hair swept up. But it wasn't the outfit that mattered. It was the peace in her eyes, the conviction. The culture of the restaurant had been transformed. The dress code had relaxed. Kindness had become policy. Sarah had risen to lead server. Miguel's creative dishes had made the news. James, once quiet and anxious, now glowed with confidence. Even Antoine, the rigid French chef, had loosened his grip, mentoring new talent with pride. Naomi called gently, approaching with urgency. Table 12 is celebrating their grandmother's birthday. She's in a wheelchair. They're worried about the space. Naomi didn't hesitate. Move them to table 15. It's more accessible. And ask Antoine to send out a birthday dessert on the house. James grinned and dashed off, and Naomi felt it again, that click in her chest, that certainty that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Weeks later, Thomas invited her for coffee again. "What you did," he told her, "was brave, not just kind. You didn't have to do it. You weren't being watched. That's how I knew." She sipped her latte. "I just couldn't let it go." "Exactly," he said. "That's what leadership looks like." Now, as Naomi looked around her restaurant in spirit if not in name, she saw families, couples, elderly patrons, even a table of college kids laughing over creme brulee. She saw joy. She saw belonging. And then her phone buzzed. A new review had gone viral. Lavinia has become something rare, not just refined, but real. This is what hospitality looks like. She locked the doors that night with a heart so full, it ached. That $60.00 meal had cost her tips, but it bought her a future. It proved that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness plant the seeds for revolutions, not just in restaurants, but in people. And Naomi Green would never forget that. Not ever.